Okay, good afternoon. I now have it's 1:01, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's meeting of the Central Florida Water Initiative Steering Committee and Public Meeting. We're excited to have you all in attendance virtually this afternoon. My name is Pamela Flores with DEP's Office of Water Policy and Ecosystems Restoration, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to present the draft results of the 5-year update to the 2020 CFWI Regional Water Supply Plan, also referred to as the 2025 CFWI Regional Water Supply Plan. Staff from St. John's, Southwest, and South Florida Water Management Districts are in the process of preparing the 2025 CFWI Plan Update. The draft 2025 Plan Update is anticipated to be available for the public review in early 2025. The final 2025 CFWI plan is scheduled to be approved by the governing boards and of the districts by the end of 2025. Before turning it over to the amazing staff that will be presenting the information listed on the agenda, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, please note this meeting is being broadcast over Zoom and is being recorded. I want to thank South Florida Water Management District for hosting the meeting on Zoom. All attendees should be in listen-only mode during the meeting. Committee members, please indicate that you have a question in the course of the meeting and we'll recognize you to speak. You have the ability to unmute yourself. For those attending from the public, please hold comments for the general public period after the staff presentations have concluded. Before we jump into the agenda, I'm going to take a moment to recognize the steering committee members in attendance. Members, when I call your name, please unmute and indicate that you are present. Adam Blaylock.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Todd Sweeney.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Benjamin Butler.
Good afternoon, this is Ben.
Thank you. Ashley Bell Barnett. Okay. Chris Peterson.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. West Gregory.
Here.
Thank you for your attendance. Next, we're going to go over the agenda for today's meeting. You can find a copy of today's agenda at the CFWI meetings website at cfwiwater.com/meetings. Today, we will hear from district staff as they provide a recap and present draft results for the 2025 CFWI Regional Water Supply Plan. Specifically on the agenda today, we will be viewing presentations on an overview of the 2025 CFWI plan, hydrologic analysis, minimum flows and minimum water levels, environmental measures, and an update on the data monitoring and investigations team. There are no action items on today's agenda, but we will have time to allow for questions from the steering committee after staff presentations. Then we will have a short break between the environmental measures and data monitoring and investigation update, followed by the general public comment period, which will be held after the presentation so we can hear feedback from the public. We ask that all comments from the public be held until then. I will go over the instructions on how to provide comment later in the meeting at the beginning of the public comment period. Following the public comment period, we will have the final comments from the steering committee members, and then we will cover the upcoming schedule for the steering committee and we will adjourn. Now, I would like to welcome our first presenter, Callie Register, the Regional Water Supply Planning Coordinator from the St. Johns River Water Management District Bureau of Water Supply and Planning. Today, she will be presenting the overview of the 2025 CFWI Regional Water Supply Plan.
Thanks, Pam. Hi, everyone. Like she said, I'm Callie Register with the St. Johns River Water Management District. I'm the Regional Water Supply Planning Coordinator for CFWI. The purpose of this portion of our presentation is to present the draft results of the 2025 Regional Water Supply Plan. I'll start with an overview of the CFWI and the Regional Water Supply Plan process. The Central Florida Water Initiative is a collaborative water supply planning effort covering an area including portions of 3 water management districts and 5 counties, all of Orange, Osceola, Seminole, Polk, and Southern Lake County, as shown here. There are 50 local governments in our area, with the city of Orlando being the largest. The CFWI planning area is home to approximately 3.4 million people and is continuing to grow rapidly. As we know, Central Florida is an international tourist destination with Disney World, Universal Studios, and many more attractions. Central Florida also sustains a major agricultural industry with about 122,000 agricultural acres under irrigation, primarily in citrus, followed by sod. Over 56% of the ag demand is in Southwest Florida Water Management District, while about 22% occurs in each of the other two water management districts. In addition, there are many natural systems in this region that are water dependent, including springs, wetlands, and many lakes. The statutory requirements for regional water supply plans include population and water demand projections for a 20-year planning period, an assessment of available water supplies to determine whether current and future demands can be met with fresh groundwater without harming Florida's natural systems, and if not, identification of management strategies, water conservation, and alternative water supply projects to meet future needs. Plans must also identify project funding options, and the plans must be updated every 5 years. Since the plan is updated every 5 years and began in 2015, we've had the benefit of not starting from scratch for the 2025 plan and have built on the work done for the 2015 and 2020 plans. So far, we've updated the historic and projected population, water use, and water demand projections for the 2025 CFWI Regional Water Supply Plan. The updated water use data was then used as input to the groundwater flow model. Using these model results, the districts have been able to verify existing and reasonably anticipated groundwater sources. In addition, we have also updated the strategies included in the 2020 CFWI Regional Water Supply Plan, such as identification of water supply and water resource development options and water conservation potential to meet the future water demands identified while protecting water resources and related natural systems. The 2025 CFWI Regional Water Supply Plan is the second 5-year update to the 2015 CFWI Regional Water Supply Plan. The 2015 and 2020 plans were developed in coordination with the 3 water management districts, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Florida Department of Agricultural and Consumer Services, other agencies and stakeholders. This 2025 CFWI Regional Water Supply Plan is occurring in a streamlined manner because of processes and procedures already developed, documented, and agreed upon previously during the first 2 regional water supply plans, which provided an established framework for future updates. The CFWI planning area projections are summarized here and are the same as previously shared at our meeting last October and at the Technical Methods Workshop in April. The population and demand projections were developed with input from many external stakeholders through a process that started with a kickoff meeting back in January 2022. As shown, the 2025 CFWI Regional Water Supply Plan population is projected to have a 40% increase to 4.7 million people by 2045. Irrigated agricultural acreage and water demand is projected to decrease slightly, and total water demand is projected to increase by 41% to 903 MGD, or million gallons per day, by 2045. This slide shows the historic water use and projected water demand in the CFWI planning area. Our water demands are trending with historic water use, considering the anticipated population growth. From 2015 to 2020, the area had an increase in population of approximately 450,000 people. This increase can be attributed to not only growth, but the estimates of population provided by the 2020 U.S. Census. This area's efficient use of reclaimed water and implementation of conservation has contributed to the trends we are seeing and is expected to continue to offset the groundwater demands of the CFWI planning area. To date, in addition to various stakeholder meetings, we've conducted a public outreach meeting last October and a technical methods workshop in April of this year. Today, we're presenting the draft results to the steering committee and the public. The 3 districts will present overviews to their governing boards in February and March of 2025 regarding the draft regional water supply plan, and then the draft plan will be posted mid-March for public review and comment. Another steering committee and public meeting will be held in April 2025 to discuss the draft plan and answer any questions. The public comment period will be open for 60 calendar days after posting, with anticipated comment period closing mid-May 2025. A final steering committee and public meeting will be held in October 2025 to provide an overview of comments received and any substantial changes made to the draft final plan. The 3 districts will present the draft final plan to their governing boards in November 2025. After all approvals, the final 2025 CFWI Regional Water Supply Plan will be posted to the CFWI website in December 2025. Are there any questions at this time from the steering committee on this portion of the presentation? If not, I'll hand it over to Pete Kwiatkowski with South Florida Water Management District. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm going to be discussing the results of the modeling effort that was conducted in support of the water supply plan. I have the pleasure and the honor of sharing this information. A lot of team members from South Florida, Southwest, and St. John's did a lot of the heavy lifting. I'm doing the light lifting today. So Callie mentioned that there was a technical methods workshop in April, and we went through a lot more detail in terms of describing the groundwater model and the scenarios that we were planning on running. And so I'm just going to cover those briefly today and focus more on the model results. Okay, in the blue square, if you will, is the extent of the groundwater model. So it extends much further than the red lined area, which is the CFWI planning area. And that's to make sure that we're making sure that any influences of groundwater withdrawals outside of CFWI are still accounted for in this effort. So the purpose of what we're doing with the model is we're using a calibrated peer-reviewed groundwater flow model, and we're simulating the effects of groundwater withdrawals on natural systems, including springs, lakes, wetlands, and aquifers, and obviously other users as well. And we're assisting in evaluating whether the projected water supply demands that were developed for this plan can be met over the 20-year planning horizon while still meeting our resource protection criteria. So here's the modeling scenarios. So first off, the model is calibrated and verified from 2003 to 2014. Those are the hydrologic stresses and rainfall and all the other things that are going on during that period. So we take that same 2003 to 2004 conditions, which is wet and dry years. You may remember in 2004, 2005, we had hurricanes Francis, Jean, and Wilma, for example. And then we also had 2007, 2008 water shortage. So this 2003 to 2014 period is very robust because it has extremely wet and extremely dry conditions. And that's what you want to use for your groundwater modeling. You want to look at extreme events and make sure that the model can still calibrate under those conditions. And we did do that. So we've got several modeling scenarios. The first one I'm going to discuss is the reference condition. And what we do is we take the 2016 to 2020 average withdrawals conditions, and that's one scenario, and we run those withdrawals through the 2003 to 2014 meteorological conditions that happened during that time. So again, now you're taking the 26 to 2020 average withdrawals conditions, and you're running it through that 2003 to 2014 that has the extreme wet and extreme dry. So that's the reference condition. And then we also did future conditions starting with 2025 in 5-year increments to 2045. And that provides us an ability to look at the influence of withdrawals as they are projected to increase over time. Today, for brevity's sake, I'm just going to cover the 2045 because that's the furthest out for the 20-year planning horizon, and it's the greatest amount of demands that are being simulated. So what we do is, and the results I'm going to present today is, we take a look at the withdrawal condition and we subtract out the reference condition. And what's left is the delta or the change between those two. And that's what's going to be shown on the graphics that I have today. So we're comparing the simulated water levels and flows between that reference condition and the future withdrawal condition. And we're evaluating the effects of groundwater withdrawals on aquifers and the natural systems as I described earlier. So there are 3 aquifer systems that we're going to be looking at today and that cover the Central Florida area. The first is the uppermost layer, which is the superficial aquifer system. The next is the upper Floridan, and that's the traditional groundwater source in the Central Florida area. And then finally, the lower Floridan aquifer, which is below the upper Floridan, obviously. And that's an alternative source of water. In many instances, it is a brackish quality. Sometimes it's slightly fresh, but it's mostly of brackish or slightly saline water quality. And that's what we're projecting. A lot of our future demands are going to be tapping that lower Floridan aquifer. But on this slide, it's the superficial aquifer system. And this, as I mentioned earlier, what we're showing on the graphics is the 2045 withdrawals condition minus the 2016 to 2020 reference condition. And we're looking at the change in the water levels as a result of those two things, and it's displayed on this graphic. Superficial aquifer system is not greatly used to meet water supply demands. It's not as permeable as the upper Floridan, and it hasn't traditionally been relied upon for a great source of water supply. So it's not surprising that the differences in water levels between 2045 and the reference condition are relatively slight. Most of the changes are in the plus or minus 1 foot range. There's a couple of areas by Lake Apopka, north and south of it, that you see some slight differences. I want to actually point to the legend at the bottom of the graphic where you're seeing the blues or the warm colors where the difference is positive, and the warmer colors, I'm sorry, yeah, right, yeah, cool were the blue and the warmer are the pinks and oranges and reds. And that's where there's a drawdown or an increase or decrease in water level as a result of that, comparing those two conditions. So what you see here is there's a lot of white, which means there's really not a whole lot of change between the 2045 and the 2016. And there's a couple of areas that are a little bit warmer in the oranges and reds on the northern side of the CFWI planning area. And then and there's a couple of areas that are in the bluish category. And that's actually showing an increase in water levels between 2045 and 2016. And that comes about because something is called return flow. So typically, we're pulling water, as I said, from the upper Floridan and maybe the lower Floridan and surface water withdrawals. And that water, as applied through irrigation and so forth, is actually recharging the superficial aquifer system. So that's why you have some areas where the water levels are actually higher in 2045 compared to the reference condition of 2016 to 2020. But overall, nothing to be super concerned about on this one. So as I said earlier, the upper Floridan aquifer is the traditional source of groundwater in the Central Florida area. This graphic is the 2045 withdrawals condition minus 2016 reference condition. And what you could see compared to the superficial aquifer, the differences are much larger. This is not surprising because the upper Floridan aquifer is a confined aquifer, and the cone of influence or cone of depression of pumping from the upper Floridan, it extends over a much larger area compared to the superficial aquifer system. So we do see with these warmer colors somewhere between and the light pink is -3 to -1, the orange is of -5 to -3, and there's a couple of areas where it's -10 to -5. But the vast majority of the planning area is covered with water level differences between -3 to -1. So it's those are the results. And some of the areas that have a little bit larger drawdowns are in north central Osceola, South Orange, and Southwest Polk. And then last is the lower Florida aquifer. Again, this is an alternative water supply source. It's of brackish or slightly saline quality. And a little bit different looking graphic compared to what we have for the upper Floridan. You can see that the drawdown influence is kind of coalesced in one larger blob in the central portion of the CFWI planning area. Differences in water levels for the most part are 1 to 3 feet. They're pretty widely dispersed. And some of the areas where things are a little bit, drawdowns a little bit greater or south central Orange, north central Osceola, and they have differences of maybe 3 to 5 feet between the withdrawal 2045 and the reference condition. I want to point out a couple of areas that have a little bit larger drawdowns in the future. And they're in southeast Lake County, which is right there. And then in South Osceola County at the Toho Water Authority, Cypress Lake, Lower Florida Aquifer well field. If you were to blindfold me and ask me to have taken a guess at what this might look like, I probably would have been pretty close in drawing this graphic in terms of understanding where some of the future lower Florida aquifer withdrawals are coming from. And so these results are pretty well expected in terms of their withdrawal impacts. So it was mentioned earlier that the model that we used here was a flow model, but one of the challenges we have is there are some areas where water quality is somewhat poor with depth, and the concern is something that we call upconing. So if you're pumping from the upper Florida aquifer, let's say, and there's poor quality water in an aquifer below it, if you pump the upper Florida aquifer wells too hard, you could induce upconing or have that poor quality water, which is more saline, start moving upward toward the production well that you're pumping from. And that could cause a problem because your water treatment plant is probably not designed to take higher salinity water. So we're limited in what we can do for this evaluation because it's a groundwater flow model and there's no ability to account for density dependency like we have in the aquifer systems here. So we have to come up with a strategy of trying to address this issue, but still using the groundwater flow model. And so what we did was we took a look at the detailed model output, and we figured out where in all of these model cells that constitute the model, does it look like there's a vertical upward gradient? And we're able to figure that out through the magic of GIS, exactly where those stood. And then we superimposed those locations in areas where we know the total dissolved solids of the aquifer system is elevated. And that's what the contours are showing. And there's a couple of areas that, again, no surprise, there's a couple of areas where we found that there were some elevated total dissolved solids concentrations in the lower portions of the aquifer system, coupled with places where the model was indicating that there was a vertical gradient upward showing a vertical flow. And when you combine those two locations, you identify areas of potential problems. And as it turns out, once again, these are areas that we sort of already knew about. Northern Polk County and Northern Seminole County are known to have areas, well fields of concern. And this is, again, something that we've known about for a long time, and that there are actually permits and permit conditions in place to deal with this issue. In other words, we know it's an issue in the real world. It turns out it's actually being supported with our modeling results, and that there are well field operating regimes in place and monitoring regimes in place that specifically look in these areas and make sure that the utilities are not pulling too much water from these areas that they're going to cause this upconing. So again, it's good. It's very reassuring to see that areas that were covered by a more detailed well field operating regimes and monitoring regimes are the areas that were identified as potential areas of concern. But again, there's nothing really new here compared to what we've already known in terms of well field operations and permit conditions. And then my last slide is, we made some, the modeling team has done a good job over the last decade or whatever it is to make improvements to the model. And we did that a couple of years, 2 or 3 years ago. We made some improvements soon after it was calibrated and peer reviewed. We recognized that there was a little bit more we can do. And we did that, and that's the version of the model that we have used to support the 2025 water supply plan. And what I wanted to show here was, sometimes, people can be skeptical of modeling results, and if you make changes, there's some concern that you mess something up. And what I wanted to show here is on the left-hand side is what the modeling results look like from the previous water supply plan that projected water demands out to 2040. And then on the right-hand side is the current condition for the upper Florida aquifer. And we made sure that we used the same color ramp on the bottom in terms of the withdrawals and the drawdown impacts. And what you see is they're very similar. The 2040, I think, had a little bit greater upper Florida withdrawals than we're assuming for 2045. But in general, you see these two pink blobs and a couple of orange blobs in between there. And it's pretty much showing the same types of drawdowns. And again, this is reassuring to us on the modeling team and hopefully to you as well that this newer version of the model that was had the calibration updated a little bit from where we were is still showing the same levels of drawdown. And I think later on today you're going to see the results of from the MFL team as well as the wetlands evaluation, and they're to a great extent they're using the drawdown conditions from each of those future withdrawal scenarios in terms of impacts to the upper Florida aquifer, and that's going to be the focus of the rest of that presentation. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Andrew Sutherland to talk about the minimum flows and minimum water levels analysis. Oh, so I'm being asked to ask steering committee members if they have any specific questions on this portion of the presentation.
Hi, this is Wes. I have a probably basic question that I think I know the answer, but I want to double check. For the agricultural users, where are they drawing most of their water from? Which aquifer? Is it superficial, upper, lower?
Yeah, I would say almost all of them are pulling from the upper Florida aquifer. Very
Okay.
few from the superficial, and very few, even fewer from the lower Florida. Any other questions from the steering committee members? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Like you said, I'm Andrew Sutherland. I'm the MFL program lead at St. John's and the lead for the MFL and Reservations Working Group. And today I'm going to summarize the MFL assessment for the 2025 plan. So to begin, what are MFLs? Minimum flows and minimum water levels are regulatory criteria required by statute and developed by the state's water management districts, or FDEP. They identify the limit beyond which additional water withdrawals would be significantly harmful to the water resources or ecology of an area. Minimum flows are set for flowing water bodies like rivers and springs. Minimum levels are set for non-flowing water bodies like lakes, wetlands, and aquifers. And it's important to remember that MFLs represent hydrologic statistics. They define the amount of water over time, and we try to strike a balance between the water needed for consumptive uses and needed for ecological and other non-consumptive environmental uses. And so why do water management districts set MFLs? As I noted on the previous slide, there's a statutory directive to set MFLs that establish limits to surface and groundwater withdrawal. But further, we set them because they're very valuable tools for regulatory and water supply planning. MFLs help us assess the effects of current and future pumping on those non-consumptive uses. As was done for previous CFWI planning efforts, MFL's environmental criteria have been developed and assessed to support regional water supply planning efforts. These criteria include adopted MFLs, new and revised MFLs that are nearing adoption, those that have been through peer review but not yet adopted, and regulatory well water levels that have been established to support MFL recovery efforts. Other information used for these analyses, as Pete mentioned, include groundwater model results, site-specific water budget models or surface water models, as well as all sorts of types of hydrologic data, such as water levels, flows, rainfall data, etc. As with previous water supply plans, we've developed a reference withdrawal condition, which has already been mentioned, with which to compare future withdrawal scenarios. This hypothetical graph depicts a modeled time series of UFA water levels at a well near an MFL lake for the modeled reference condition and a future withdrawals condition scenario. The difference between these two water level records represents the change, in this case, UFA drawdown, that could be expected based on the projected withdrawal scenario. This change in UFA water level is then associated with change in the levels of an MFL water body using the surface water models or water budget models that I mentioned before. And an allowable decrease in UFA level is referred to as the freeboard for an MFL system. A necessary increase in UFA water levels that would be needed to meet an MFL that is currently not being met is also referred to as a deficit. Analogous types of assessments based on predicted spring flows are also conducted for spring MFLs. So we use the ECFTX model output and site-specific water budget models to quantify freeboard or deficit values for MFL-related criteria for the reference condition and those future withdrawal condition scenarios that Pete mentioned, including those associated with projected 2025 through 2045 withdrawal demands. And here are the MFLs and MFL-related environmental criteria that were assessed as part of the draft 2025 water supply plan. There are a total of 38 criteria that include 26 lakes and wetlands with adopted MFLs within the CFWI area, 1 water level target based on 5 Upper Peace River regulatory wells, 1 water level target based on 5 Ridge Lake regulatory wells, and 10 draft MFLs that include 1 new river segment, 1 reevaluated river segment, 6 reevaluated springs, and 2 reevaluated lakes. So these are primarily the 8 systems within the Wekiva River Basin, as well as Apshua Lake South and Sylvan Lake. These 10 draft MFLs have been peer-reviewed but not yet adopted, and they represent the best available information regarding protective criteria for these 10 systems. These 38 environmental criteria were evaluated based on simulated drawdown using the ECFTX version 2. We looked at predicted change from the reference condition to the projected withdrawal impacts at 2045, as well as the other scenarios mentioned previously. The reference condition, as already mentioned, represents the average pumping impacts for a 5-year period from 2016 to 2020. And this 5-year average was used for the reference condition to account for short-term interannual climatic variability. So 36 of the 38 environmental criteria have reference condition freeboards created using the water budget models that I mentioned, from which to compare various pumping scenarios. However, 2 of the water level targets, that for the Upper Peace River and the Ridge Lakes, were assessed with a slightly different method. The reference condition for these was determined for the water supply plan by calculating a 10-year moving average from 2016 to 2020. This 5-year essentially average of averages yields a reference level that can be compared to a given target water level, here shown as the dashed line, and can be compared to future withdrawal conditions. So if we take the top graph as an example, the Ridge Lake's target elevation, which is set at 91.5 feet, there is also a 5-year reference condition average of averages of 93.2. Yielding a freeboard at the reference condition of 1.7 feet. This is the reference condition freeboard that was then compared to future withdrawal scenarios. So this is a little different than for the 36 of the 38 where we actually use surface water models to create those reference condition freeboards. In this case, in each of these 2 cases, it was done in this way. And both targets, it's worth noting, for the Upper Peace River wells and the Ridge Lake wells are met under the reference condition and all future withdrawal conditions. And on this slide, we have a summary of the assessment results for all 38 environmental criteria. Of the 38 criteria, a total of 22 were met and 16 not met under the reference condition. Those that are not met under the reference condition include the 8 Southwest Florida lakes that you see listed here: Aurora, Crooked, Eagle, Easy, Eva, McLeod, Star, and Wales. As well as in the St. Johns River Water Management District, the Wekiva River at State Road 46, the Little Wekiva River, and the 6 Wekiva River Basin Springs. Between the reference condition and 2040 withdrawal condition, the status of these 38 systems did not change. However, at 2045, if you look at the last column on the right, one additional system changes from met to not met, and that is Sylvan Lake in Seminole County. And therefore, at the planning horizon, we have a total of 21 criteria meeting and 17 not meeting their MFLs. And here we have maps showing the reference condition on the left and the 2045 withdrawal condition on the right. These maps depict the results from the previous slide with green symbols for MFLs that are met and red symbols for MFLs that are not met. And again, the only change from the map on the left to the right is Sylvan Lake up in the very upper part of the map of the CFWI in Seminole County, changing from green to red. And other than that one system, MFL statuses don't change between the reference condition and the planning horizon. And so with that, that is the summary of the MFL assessment results for the 2025 water supply plan. And I'll open it up for any steering committee questions that you may have. Okay. Well, next we have Kim Holtzwart from the Southwest Florida Water Management District, and she will be reviewing the environmental measures results for the 2025 plan.
Good afternoon. As Andrew said, I'm Kim Ross-Holtzwart. I'm a lead ecologist with the Southwest Florida Water Management District and the lead for the Environmental Measures Working Group. There are more than 1 million acres of wetlands within the CFWI planning area. And this map shows the distribution of wetlands using a classification system that was developed by the Environmental Measures Working Group. The focus of our analysis is on primarily groundwater dominated wetlands, which make up about 30 to 40% of the wetlands within the CFWI planning area. Since their hydrology is mostly or completely dependent on groundwater, these wetlands are sensitive to groundwater withdrawals, kind of like canaries in the coal mine. The CFWI planning area is divided into many different physiographic regions, as shown here on this map. Some regions are considered plains, while others are considered ridges. Because wetlands in these settings act differently, they were evaluated separately in our analysis. Plains wetlands are typically in areas where the aquifers are confined, which means that there is not much exchange of water between the superficial and upper Floridan aquifers. The water levels in plains wetlands typically don't vary very much. Wetlands in ridge settings are located where the aquifers are less confined and more leaky, which means that there is exchange of water between the aquifers. Water levels in ridge wetlands can vary widely and have large fluctuations. The primarily groundwater dominated wetlands included in our analysis consist of about 442,000 acres of wetlands. And in this map, the approximately 383,000 acres of plains wetlands are shown in green, while the almost 60,000 acres of ridge wetlands included in our analysis are shown in purple. And as you can see on this map, most of the ridge wetlands are located kind of in the center of the CFWI planning area, running north to south in the Lake Wales Ridge area. Here's the results of our risk assessment for both the plains and the ridge wetlands shown in table form. As I already mentioned, about 442,000 acres of wetlands are included in our analysis, about 383,000 acres of plains wetlands, and a little more than 59,000 acres of ridge wetlands. And that's kind of I'm kind of going to walk you through these columns. That's the total acres. Since plains wetlands are typically located in confined aquifer areas, as I already mentioned, results from ECFTX version 2.0 model layer 1, which is the superficial aquifer we use for the analysis. So that's the first row in the table. As I also mentioned earlier, ridge wetlands are located in areas that are less confined or leaky, and the water level fluctuations vary widely. Therefore, results from both ECFTX version 2.0 model layer 1, which is the superficial aquifer, and that's the second row of the table, and model layer 3, which is the upper Floridan aquifer, were used for the analysis. These two sets of results, again, rows 2 and 3 of the table, represent the range of results, with model layer 1 results, again, row 2, representing the low end, and model layer 3 results, the third row in the table, representing the upper end. Under the 2016 to 2020 reference condition, 75,600 acres of plains wetlands are stressed. Now we're getting into the second column of the results. The rest of the withdrawal conditions are shown in the following columns, and they show the probable increase in the acres of stressed wetlands for the various withdrawal conditions starting from 2025 through 2045. For example, an additional 1,450 acres of plains wetlands to become stressed under the 2025 withdrawals condition. Again, that's the third row, or the third column, I'm sorry. And under the 2045 withdrawals condition, the last column, an additional 3,870 acres are stressed. Under the reference condition, almost 15,000 acres of ridge wetlands are stressed. And we're going back to the, now we're on the second column again, the second row and the third row of the table. The rest of the columns show the range of the probable increase in stressed wetland acres, ranging from 590 to 1,810 for the 2025 withdrawal conditions. That's the third column, to from 1,410 to 5,230 acres for the 2045 withdrawal conditions. And that's the last column.
Can I ask a quick question about the last slide?
Sure, let me go back.
So the probable increases for each withdrawal condition, is that number you add, so let's look at plains, the 1,450 plus an additional 2,210, or is it 2,210 from the 75,600 number? Does that make sense? I'm sorry, I don't know if that made sense.
Hopefully the graph I'm going to show you next helps answer, but you add that to the 75,600.
Okay. I gotcha.
But let me see if this next slide helps you. If not, stop me again. So here are the 5 columns of the table that are shown graphically. And hopefully this makes it more clear. You'll see, I'm trying to present the results a few different ways. So this graph represents the probable net increase in stressed wetland acres for the various withdrawal conditions. The first set of bars represents the results for the plains wetlands using model layer 1. The bar with the green horizontal stripes represents the 2025 withdrawals condition, and an additional 1,450 acres of plains wetlands become stressed under the 2025 withdrawals condition. And under the 2045 withdrawal conditions represented by the bars with the vertical turquoise stripes, an additional 3,870 acres are stressed. The last 2 sets of bars represents the range of results for the ridge wetlands, with the middle set representing the lower end of the range using model layer 1, and the set on the right representing the upper end of the results using model layer 3. For example, again, looking at the green horizontal striped bars between 590 and 1,810 probable acres of ridge wetlands are stressed under the 2025 withdrawals condition. And for the 2045 withdrawals condition, represented by the bars with the vertical turquoise stripes between 1,410 to 5,230 probable acres of ridge wetlands are stressed. And hopefully that helped answer your questions.
It did, thank you.
So here's a third way to show the results for the plains wetlands using the results from ECFTX model layer 1. Again, the superficial aquifer system. Okay, remember we are starting with about 383,000 acres of plains wetlands, which is what the entire bar represents for each of the withdrawal conditions as well as the reference conditions. So for each bar, the red represents the proportion of stressed wetlands, while green represents the wetland acres that are not stressed. So under the reference condition, which is referenced by the first bar, about 75,000 acres are stressed, which is about 20% of the plains wetlands, if you can see the really small numbers at the bottom of the bars. Each subsequent bar represents the various withdrawal conditions. The probable increase in acres of stressed plains wetlands ranges from a 0.4% increase for the 2025 withdrawals conditions to a little over 1% for the 2045 withdrawals conditions. And by the way, the results for the 2040 withdrawals conditions are similar to those for the analyses that we conducted for the 2020 CFWI Regional Water Supply Plan, in which there was a probable increase of about 1% in stressed plains wetlands acres compared to the reference condition. Here's a similar bar graph for the ridge wetlands, except there's a lot more bars since we are showing results for both model layer 1 and model layer 3. Again, for each bar, red represents the proportion of stressed wetlands, while green represents wetland acres that are not stressed. And for the ridge wetlands, as I mentioned earlier, we're starting with almost 60,000 acres. So that's what each bar represents. As indicated in red for the first bar on the left, about 15,000 of those acres are stressed under the reference condition, which is about 25% of the ridge wetlands. Again, if you can see the pretty small numbers at the bottom, each subsequent set of bars represents the range of results for the various withdrawals conditions. For example, the probable increase in acres of stressed ridge wetlands ranges from 1 to 3% for the 2025 withdrawals conditions, and that's the first set of bars on the left there. And for the 2045 withdrawals condition, the probable increase in acres of stressed ridge wetlands ranges from 2 to 9%, as shown by the last set of bars. And by the way, the results for the 2040 withdrawals condition are similar to those for the analyses conducted for the 2020 CFWI Regional Water Supply Plan. Here's the result shown as a map using the comparison of the 2045 withdrawals condition to the reference condition as an example. Note that our results are regional, so these results apply regionally and not to a specific wetland. The map on the left represents the comparison of probable stressed plains and ridge wetland acres under the reference condition to the 2045 withdrawals condition using model layer 1, again, the superficial aquifer system. The map on the right represents the comparison of probable stressed plains and ridge wetland acres under the withdrawal condition to the 2045 withdrawals condition using model layers 1 and 3. The maps represent the range of the increase in stressed wetland acres, with the map on the left representing the low end and the map on the right representing the high end of the range. The increase in stressed acres is from bright yellow to orange. And you can see regional impacts of increases in stressed wetland acres in the Orlando area, along the Lake Wales Ridge, in central and southern Polk County, around Lake Apaca, and in Osceola County, east of the Turnpike. If you're interested in more details regarding our work, including the methods and additional results, the link to the final draft of our report is located at the bottom of the environmental measures page on the CFWI website, cfwiwater.com. With that, I will take any questions from the steering committee members before turning it back over to Pam.
Adam, I just have one question on the increase in wetland impacts that we see under at 2045. Is that because the withdrawal conditions is assuming that that increase usage is going to be coming from withdrawals of the upper Florida aquifer? I just asked that because it seems like most of the increased water demand is going to be all or most coming from alternative water supplies. So I was just curious if that is the case or not.
And since we're recording this meeting, could I get your name?
Sorry, this is Adam.
Thanks. The answer is both. For the plains wetlands, for analysis, we looked at model layer 1, which is the superficial aquifer, and then we looked at model layers 1 and 3, which look at the superficial aquifer and the upper Florida aquifer. Because to go farther, the upper Florida aquifer would have more impacts, and again, like we're using the range. And again, the upper Florida aquifer impacts the ridge wetlands more than it does the plains wetlands. I don't know if that answers your question, but we looked at
Yeah,
both.
no, I guess I was just, are those increased impacts likely to occur given that with the CFWI rule and the requirements to offset increased demands with alternative water supplies, would we actually see those wetland impacts in 2045, I guess was kind of my question.
I'm going to let Pete, the expert modeler, answer that one.
I'm the lifeline, right?
Yes.
Adam, this is Pete. So I think you raise a good point. I think even the increase in withdrawals that are coming from the lower Florida aquifer, they are still interconnected with the upper Florida and the superficial aquifer. So even though the future demands are to a large extent are coming from the lower Florida, that aquifer is not completely isolated from those upper layers. So I think you can still get drawdown impacts associated even with lower Florida withdrawals. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Pete. I was just going to say yes, but his answer is better. Anyone else? So I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Pam.
Okay, this is Pam Flores again. So we've now been going for just about an hour, and we have a bit more material to cover. So I think now is going to be a good time for us to take a quick 10-minute break and come back here at 2:05 while staff recesses. Thank you. Okay, hi. I hope everybody's had a nice quick break. We're back. I have it as now 2:05. So we're going to go ahead and continue with the meeting. For our last staff presentation, we will hear from Keith Perry, a hydrologist in the St. Johns River Bureau of Water Supply Planning. Keith will be presenting updates from the Data Monitoring and Investigations team. I'm going to hand it over to Keith now.
Good afternoon. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a brief history of the DMIT program and the team's recommendations. The goal of DMIT is to ensure that available hydrologic, environmental, and other pertinent data collected throughout the region are identified, inventoried, and accessible to support the CFWI technical initiatives and CFWI regulatory activities. A brief DMIT history is the CFWI Regional Monitoring Program. The summary report dated June 2024 was accepted. The steering committee provided additional guidance. The initial work plan began in 2015 with DMIT hydrogeologic work plan for fiscal year 2015 to fiscal year 2022. The objective of this initial plan was to establish a schedule for construction and monitoring at existing and new data collection sites that were identified in the summary report. The plan has been updated annually and approved by the Management Oversight Committee and Steering Committee in 2018. The Steering Committee approved an extension of the DMIT program through fiscal year 2025, which is the current one that we are working in, with the final update that occurred in fiscal year 2021. DMIT staff updates site status tables annually, and also site status maps are maintained and updated. Various types of monitoring sites are wetland and associated superficial aquifer systems, wells, superficial and intermediate aquifer wells, upper Floridan aquifer wells, lower Floridan aquifer wells, water quality sites, and atmospheric monitoring sites. The purpose of the DMIT wells is to monitor the surface water levels in the wetlands and groundwater levels within the associated aquifer. None of the wells are used to withdraw water. Once these sites have been established to the minimal standards that were established in 2018, these sites are professionally surveyed for location and elevation. They are also equipped with data monitoring equipment. I'll be focusing on the wetland sites and various monitor well sites for the remainder of the presentation and then present DMIT staff recommendations. This map shows the extent of various monitoring sites. The different color symbology represents the status of that location as of November 2022, which is our most updated version that is currently available. Green symbols indicate what has been completed. Blue symbols indicate that are in progress. And red symbols indicate ones that are proposed. The following slides will present the different types of sites that have been completed as of December 2023. The table will be updated again to reflect what has been accomplished in 2024 by the end of this year. Wetland and associated superficial aquifer wells. These sites are presented by the overlapping small red dots for the wetlands and blue circles for the superficial aquifer, which also represent model layer 1. The project target for the program is 104 wetland sites with 85 that have been completed. And the project target for the superficial aquifer wells is 84 with 66 completed. Superficial and intermediate aquifer wells are presented by the small blue circles, which are again model layer 1, and green circles for the intermediate aquifer, which are represented by model layer 2. Project target was 53 for surface aquifer and intermediate, with 38 completed. Additional locations potentially to be constructed in fiscal year 2024 to 2025 and beyond upon evaluation and subject to approved funding. Upper Florida aquifer sites are presented by the light blue circles and represent model layers 3, 4, and 5. The project target was 47 UFA wells with 38 that have been completed. Again, there'd be additional locations that will be constructed fiscal year 2024 and 25 beyond the evaluation and subject again to approved funding. Lower Florida aquifer wells are represented by the orange circles and also represent model layer 7. And also the yellow circles, which represent model layer 9, as well as the gray circles, which represent model layer 11. The project target was 36 LFA wells and 29 have been completed. Again, we'll look at constructing additional ones for this fiscal year 2024, 25, and again, with the further evaluation and subject to approved funding. The future DMIT actions. The team will conduct a focused reevaluation of existing and proposed wells. We will develop an amended DMIT proposed sites based on this reevaluation, and then extend the DMIT construction phase for an additional 5 years, fiscal year 2025 to fiscal year 2030, pending approval of any funding. The reevaluation stage will be the original DMIT work plan was developed after an extensive evaluation to identify data gaps to be filled with new wells. The original gap analysis was completed around 10 years ago. Since then, many of the wells proposed in the work plan have been constructed by the districts. In addition, many other wells have been completed by outside entities such as utilities. A newly focused reevaluation would use all available data to update the CFWI hydrostratigraphy to support updated model layering in the future version of the ECFTX model, and produce an amended DMIT proposed sites list to fill in any data gaps if they exist. The updated gap analysis will be completed by the end of this year or shortly after, and documented with what the methodologies that were used to complete this effort. The amend DMIT proposed sites will be based upon the reevaluation findings. Florida aquifers, such as the UFA and LFA wells, are typically higher costs, will be the top focus in the amendment, although surficial and wetland sites will be included as well. The current DMIT construction phase ends in fiscal year 2025. The team recommends extending DMIT construction phase for an additional 5 years, fiscal year 2025 through fiscal year 2030. Wells identified in the amended DMIT proposed sites will be installed during this period. At the end of the construction phase, DMIT will continue long-term monitoring and evaluation of the related data. This concludes the presentation. Are there any questions or comments from any steering committee members?
Okay, hearing no questions. I want to thank Keith for that presentation, and we are now moving on to the general public comment agenda item. We will be accepting verbal comments at this time from members of the public. To ensure everyone has a chance to comment, comments will be limited to 3 minutes. A timer appears on the screen to try to keep us to that. If you wish to speak, please raise your virtual hand and staff will enter you into the queue to provide comments. Once it's your turn, you will be called upon and unmuted. Once called upon, please restate your name to confirm your identity. The instructions on the screen indicate how you should raise your hand, pressing *9 to raise your hand.
From David McIntyre.
Hello, this is David McIntyre. I was a member of the hydrologic analysis team and the environmental measures team in the previous iterations of CFWI. I wanted to follow up a little bit on Adam Blaylock's question. I'm currently permitting a couple of water use permits in SwiftMud. And staff have taken the position that whether it's an upper or lower Floridan withdrawal, in either case, it may not lower the upper Floridan potentiometric surface below the levels that would be allowed for upper Floridan withdrawal. So in other words, lower Floridan withdrawals are ultimately subject to the same drawdown constraint as upper. And I was wondering, is that reflected in the model? It would appear not, based on the results showing regional drawdown increasing to 2045. And that if you inject that constraint, you might see some local variations of increased drawdown and increased mounting, where mitigation measures don't fall in exactly the same spot as increased withdrawals. But I don't think you should be seeing widespread potentiometric reduction past the 2025 levels. Pete, any thoughts?
Mr. McIntyre, at this time, we're just accepting public comments, but what we can do is have staff reach back out to you after the meeting to help answer those questions for you. Do you have any additional comments while you still have time?
No, ma'am, that will do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see one hand up by Angel Martin.
Okay, Mr. Martin.
Yes, thank you. I got a couple of questions. In the model where it showed in the Seminole and Polk counties upward vertical flow, was that a reversal of the flow? Did it go from downward to upward, or did it just increase in upward? And would you happen to know, did it double the flow, triple the flow? Any comment on that?
Mr. Martin, at this time, I'm not prepared to be able to answer that question, but what I can do is have staff reach out to you with the answer to that, or for further discussion on your question.
Okay. The other question I had was also related to the model. Jason LaRoche from Southwest Florida, he did a kind of new stratigraphic section showing how, based on new monitoring, new well drilling, and so forth, did the upper and lower Floridan kind of a new stratigraphic. Was that kind of taken into account in the modeling?
I'm sorry, Mr. Martin, I don't have the direct answer for you.
Okay.
So I will again take note of that question and have staff reach out. Do you have any additional comments for us at this time?
Yeah, the other comment that I had was for kind of Kim. When I've heard the term stressed used by different kind of wetland hydrologists and so forth. When Kim refers to stressed, does she mean just related to the reference level? Or are there other criteria besides the reference level that are being used to kind of categorize a wetland as stressed or not stressed?
Okay, I've noted your question is about the definition of stressed in the context of Kim's presentation, and I will note that and have staff reach back out to you to answer that question.
Okay, I appreciate that. That was the extent of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are two more hands up. The first from Michael Clyburn, followed by Tom Matiasi.
Okay, we'll go Mr. Clyburn.
Yes, this is Mike Clyburn with the Friends of the Wekiwa River. I was curious if the 2045 groundwater demand, or what that value is, and if it's going to exceed the 760 million gallons a day that was identified in the 2020 master plan as being the limit to protect the Wekiwa River and Wekiwa Springs from so that they would still meet their MFLs. So I would like to know if it's going to exceed the 760, how the Wekiva River and Wekiva Springs would be protected.
Okay, Mr. Clyburn, I have your question noted. It's about the demand number for 2045 and whether that will be protective of the Wekiva system. We'll get staff to answer that question. Do you have any other comments at this time?
No, thanks.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Tom Matiasi, followed by Dan Schmaltz.
Mr. Mariasi?
Me?
I think I can hear you. You might need to speak up just a little bit.
Okay, I can speak up a little bit. Let's see, I seen a slide that shows on 2045 that the lower Florida aquifer would have some stress. And the question for that to get back with me on is 2045 moving forward, would the lower Florida aquifer still be a good supply of alternative water? That was number one. And number two, they had mentioned some upwelling between the upper Floridan and the lower Floridan, pulling some brackish up to the upper Floridan. I've been led to believe that there was a pretty good confining layer between the upper Floridan and the lower Floridan. I'd like to get some more commentary back on that.
Okay, we'll have staff reach out to you to follow up on those questions.
Thank you much.
Let's see a hand up from Dan Schmutz.
Mr. Schmutz?
Yes, hello. So thank you. And that's great that the CFWI, the EMT report is available already. I have not had a chance to review that yet, so this question might be answered by that report. But I was curious about, the presentation as far as the identification of these are some specific areas, where stress may increase in wetlands. And just knowing that this is a probabilistic method and that there are definitely uncertainties about the precise locations of stress. In particular, I was thinking that was interesting that the wetlands, north of Lake Apopka were likely to increase in stress during the period, just because there might be some other, surface water modifications going on there, site-specific information. Just wanted to mention that and hopefully at some point have a better understanding of the trade-offs there and discussing site-specific locations versus the probabilistic method. So that's it. I can wait for my answer.
Okay. Do we have any other public comments in queue?
I see no other hands raised. Nope. Angel Martin has raised his hand, followed by Gabrielle Milch.
Okay, we'll go back to Mr. Martin.
Yes, thank you. I forgot one point, and the previous speaker kind of jogged my memory. Well, can you get maybe staff to get back to me? In the DMIT process, is there any consideration about possibly placing observation monitoring wells in the area where you have possible upward leakage of brackish or slightly saline water from the lower Floridan to the upper Floridan? There are places where the confining unit in some areas is not that confining or is not that thick. And I was curious to see if there's any plans, any discussion on possibly placing some observation wells in an area where you might be able to monitor the possible upward movement of higher chloride concentration waters from the lower to the upper Florida aquifer.
Okay, Mr. Martin, I've noted that question, and I will get staff to look at the DMET plan, and get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
There's no more hands up at this time.
Okay. Okay, now that we've heard from the public and our presenters, as well as completed the rest of our agenda topics, we are now moving on to the steering committee comment portion of the meeting. Committee members may raise their hand and unmute themselves once recognized. Are there any additional comments from the steering committee members at this time? I'm just giving a second in case anybody's having trouble with their unmute button.
Looks like we have two hands up.
Okay.
Todd Swingle and Benjamin Butler.
Okay, we'll go with Mr. Swingle first.
Yeah, and I get this is a clarification and actually does tie in a little bit to some of the questions that we just heard, which I know in closing, you'll talk about the subsequent meetings of the steering committee. If you could just give a little bit of insight into what those will look like, particularly as it this information, which was very good in setting the stage for the analysis. At what point do you anticipate translating that into some of those usage estimates and deriving interpretation?
Mr. Swingle, just so I'm understanding what your question is, you're asking when the conclusion.
Yeah, I can just let me clarify. So, at the end of the day, you presented these the comparisons between 2020 and 2025. They look largely comparable, and somewhat related to that question of the 760 million gallons. So, my question really is it the next meeting? Is it further out? What's the timetable for looking at the impacts of this analysis on that water supply component? So really, what are those next steps within these from a steering committee agenda standpoint?
Hi, Todd. It's Stacy Paisto. In regards to the schedule, we anticipate that the draft public water supply plan is going to be released in mid-March. And we're anticipating that the next steering committee public meeting will be in April, and all of this will be presented at that time.
Great. And so that's where this will be, these model runs will be translated into from a planning standpoint on projects and any impacts on the 2020 findings.
In regards to specific projects, no, we did not do model runs for specific projects. We only did it region-wide, if that's what you're asking.
No, understood. So how do I say this better? I'm not articulating myself very well. I understand not the specific projects, but back to that piece of, from the overall flow demands, the 760, how does, is that changed? What what does this data mean from a water supply planning standpoint? And I'm taking that really is the plan, and that's in the spring in March and April. So I think you answered it.
Okay. Hey, Todd, this is Pete Kwiatkowski. The 760, the regulatory cap, that's not changing as a result of this planning effort.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I was looking for, and just that overall groundwater availability, and then as we turn that into supply options. So thank you.
No, thank you. And then we had one additional.
Benjamin Butler, that's his hand raised.
Okay, Mr. Butler.
All right, thank you, Ms. Pam. Just a general comment here. I appreciate staff for the presentations. I think it's, and also our public commenters. I know they've asked some questions, and I'm sure all of our staff at least one of our staff members hasn't answered every one of those questions. But to me, this is just a reminder of the preliminary data we've looked at today, that we've got challenges before us and opportunities. And staff are going to be looking to y'all to help get some good advice here into the future. So appreciate all the presentations and the work you're going to do, and look forward to the draft.
All right. Thank you so much for those comments.
We have
Any,
several hands that have gone up. Adam Blaylock, followed by Wes Gregory.
okay, we'll go with Mr. Blaylock first.
I thank you. Yeah, I was trying to find the raise hand item on my phone. Sorry to have to be driving, but just wanted to say thank you to all the work staff has done to put together the data and all the data collection and everything and analysis and the time, and appreciate the other steering committee members making time available to be on the call and meeting today, and look forward to seeing the draft and continue to move forward and work with stakeholders as we look at funding alternative water supply projects and doing what we can to assist in meeting those increased demands and be able to allow for the impacts to wetlands and aquifer and surface water to meet the MFLs that are established. So thanks again, and appreciate the discussion.
Thank you. And we have Mr. Gregory.
Thank you. And it was a very informative presentation. I like the graphics. I learned by looking at pictures, and that was very nice. I think it's interesting to look at where the drawdowns or where we're seeing the impacts in the aquifer, and you can compare that to data we're collecting within our office of where agriculture is occurring, and you can kind of see, and this is very, me just looking at different pictures right now, that where we're seeing the impacts that you guys are showing are not the same areas where we're having agriculture, and the agriculture in this area isn't very intense. So I wanted to offer up that if you guys need maps of what's going on where, we'd be happy to share that and put it on our website. Actually, our BMP enrollment data is on our website, and we can provide the GIS layers for you guys for that.
Very good. Really appreciate that offer, Mr. Gregory. Are there any other steering committee comments at this time? Okay, it appears that we do not have any additional steering committee comments. So I appreciate you guys commenting. We're going to now move on to discussing the steering committee's schedule. As alluded to during Callie's presentation and when Stacy answered Mr. Swingle's question, the proposed schedule for the next steering committee meetings is going to be to meet again in April. This is going to be after the draft water supply plan is published, so that we can discuss the findings within the draft plan at that time. I will be reaching out to go ahead and get that meeting scheduled very shortly, as I know we all have very, very busy schedules and they fill up fast. So please keep an eye out in your inbox for a meeting invite or coordination call to get that scheduled. After that April 2025 meeting, we will look ahead for scheduling the October 2025 meeting, wherein we will look at the final draft of the water supply plan. And so we do have 2 planned steering committee meetings in 2025 to look ahead to. Again, please keep an eye out for your request for availability in your inbox within the next week or so. Okay, so with that brings us to the end of this steering committee meeting. I think we've had a great meeting, a lot of good questions from the public, a lot of good questions from the steering committee member as well. Before we adjourn, I want to thank our host, South Florida Water Management District, for hosting us virtually on Zoom. Thank you to the presenters, support staff that have ensured everything ran smoothly, steering committee members for your time today, and the public attendees who offered their public comment and your time to attend. With that, we are adjourned.